not going to show the whole slideshow. I'm just going to show the one. So this is basically the framework. And again, it's non-linear. It's kind of like how groups move through a cycle. And there's two pieces that we find extremely useful, interesting, crucial to the success of a group. And that is the systemic influences in the relational practice. So we've pulled those two out on purpose because they permeate everything. And the framework also has a good, I think, balance between the doing and the being of being a group supervisor. So I'm going to invite people to put your hands up if you want to ask questions or to engage. It would be really nice if this was a conversation. So in terms of relational practice, when we have a group, we have multiple relationships at play. And we really feel that the relationships are one of the key success factors of how a group might work. So you have your relationship with each individual member of the group, but also within the group, there are some relationships as well. And then there's the whole group as a whole. So when you add more people, there's a multiplier effect of how many relationships are in that space that a supervisor is watching, looking after, paying attention to, facilitating, all of those things that are going along. And this can create some complexity in the system for the supervisor and for the group. And this is about group dynamics of what's going on in this space and what we are paying attention to as a group supervisor. This systemic influence is, and we tried to create this in the model. You can see the reverberating echoes here, that there is the system of each individual that comes into the space. There's also the system of the group itself, and then all the co-systems within the systems, and then the wider system, all the different systems out there that are influencing what's happening in the group. Any questions or comments to get so far? You'll see how this model shapes up. All right, so the first one in the circles model, or the circles framework, is the C for configuring groups. And configuring groups happens long before the supervision starts. As a group supervisor, what are some of the things that you might want to think through before starting a group? Let's hear some thoughts.
I'd want to know existing relationships in the room.
Yeah, you might want to know existing relationships. You might want to know your relationship to folks in the group. Some you may know really well, some you don't know at all.
And those people who are clearly new to not only coaching supervision, but also whatever it is the people we're gathering with.
Yeah. Right. Great. What else do you want to know when you're configuring groups? And Fiona?
Numbers of people in the group.
Numbers. How many should be in the group? Do you like to work with 3? Do you like to work with 6? Do you like to work with 10? What's your comfort level in a supervision group? Thank you. Fiona?
I would like to really understand the purpose and ask people to talk to me about why they're interested, to see whether we can find what we want, what we would like to do is what they're drawn to. It's part of the contract making, I think.
Yeah, the purpose. Do you hold groups for specific topics, or do you have a wide open group?
A mixture, really. It depends, if I'm working for a company and they want me to supervise their coaches, then we have a company agenda as well as the coaches agenda. I prefer to work with a more open agenda where we decide what we're going to do together.
Yeah, thank you for that, Fiona, because if you work for companies and organizations, that's a whole new
Sure.
thing to talk about. And we have a separate chapter for that, internal coaches. Do you get a say in who's in the group? Do you even get a say in the pay rate? Do you get a say in how big the group is? Like there's a lot of additional questions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Some do, some don't. So these are things to think about. Thank you. Michelle.
Explicit and implicit rules.
Yes, the implicit implicit, explicit rules of this particular group. And we'll get
Exactly.
to initiating agreements as well. So also the frequency. How frequent does this group meet? How long does it meet for? Some meet for an hour, some meet for 90 minutes, some meet for 2 hours. Lynn, go ahead.
Mine was along the same lines, the logistics of, if people are in all different time zones, when are you going to meet? That's going to work for most of the people in the group.
Yeah, if you're working globally, how do you make that work? For sure. Different time zones. Sharon.
Yeah, I also look at the level of experience of the coaches coming into the group and what that mix could look like.
That's a great observation. Some supervisors believe you put people in, doesn't matter what their level of experience is, and others, I've started to be more curating of groups where my more senior groups coaches get together. In fact, I have one that are all supervisors, 4 supervisors, 5 supervisors, and so we do supervision of supervision plus supervision of coaching, as long as we're explicit on what we're talking about. Teresa.
I was thinking about the psychological contract as well. It's
Yes,
important here, right?
very important. And so how many of you actually run groups? Let's see the show of hands. And how many of you have a conversation with each of potential participant before you bring them into a group? Could be important, right? In terms of, or is it going to work? Do they have the same kind of, there's some groups that are like, they want to stick together because they went to the same school. And there's others that want somebody totally different to their school for different experiences and learning. Yes, Jean Elvier.
Yes, it might be interesting to ask them to share their intentions as they
Yeah,
are joining the group and they're going to work together. They might not know each other, as you said, and it could be interesting to ask them to share intentions.
that's a great point because some people come because they have to get that box ticked off versus they really want to learn from different people, different styles, different schools of thought. Also, so we're looking at their commitment as well. We're looking at fee considerations. What fees will you charge? Will you have sliding scales, or is it going to be pretty set? And this thought about curating. So we know right now we have team coaching supervision groups, right? So they are really distinct. But do you curate for others? Do you do, as some of you've said, more experienced coaches, less experienced coaches? What other groups? BIPOC groups, coaching for social justice, different types of groups that you might want to think about initiating.
When I have my initial conversations, I also, if I don't already know them, inquire about their learning styles.
Learning
Are
styles.
they a talker? Do they have to process before they speak? Because I try to get folks into the conversation as much as I can.
Great. And a real critical question for me is, what is it you need in order to feel safe enough to do the work that you want to do in that space? Because I can't create a safe space for you as the supervisor, but I can create some conditions and hopefully you will be able to feel safe enough at any given points to share and be vulnerable the way you need to be. Great. So before we even start, there's this whole piece around how do you, sometimes configuring groups can last 6 months, trying to curate the groups. And this is the part that is most challenging for me. It's like, okay, who goes with whom? How's this going to work? What's the time zone? What's the time we're going to put this in? Sorry, go ahead. Somebody was talking.
Yeah, sorry, there was something in the chat also, which I don't think was covered, was what is the expected commitment and what will we do when someone can't make it? What reasons are okay if they don't show up?
Thank you. So that is starting to slip into the initiating agreements part, right? Is we talk about that in our configuring groups when we meet with different people, so we get a sense of what people are looking for, you know, what kind of agreements, what's that psychological safety, what do they need? But then in terms of initiating agreements, we talk about agreements and we talk about contracts and what's the language that you prefer. There's some cultural nuances to some of this. There's almost also that phrase ABC, always be contracting. It comes from a writer named Watt, W-A-T-T, from many years ago, and many of us have adopted it, but I want to give credit to him because he's the one that coined that phrase. What else would we think about in initiating agreements for groups? So we have this very
Oh, I've just thought of something. It would be interesting to find out what theoretical basis or models are folk working with, and would they like to expand that, develop deeper knowledge of that particular approach? I mean, I think that's intriguing, really.
Yeah, I will often ask, what models are you familiar with? Which one do you want to work with when you present a case?
Yeah.
Offer that out, absolutely. Sunny, did you have something to add?
No, not yet.
Oh, I thought I saw your screen light up. There's formal contracts, there's informal contracts, there's different layers of contracting as well. Lynn, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking about, even at the beginning, talking about how will we handle if someone doesn't want to complete, wants
Ah,
to leave.
yes. So somebody started talking about that a little bit earlier, right? What are the rules around leaving? What are the rules around, is it in your contract? Is it written there? What's the agreement in the larger group? And it's going to touch on endings too, that Lynn wrote that chapter on around, sometimes people leave in the middle of a group. What do you do about that? How do you feel complete in all of that, both for them and for the people that are left in the group continuing? So there's those pieces to think about as well. Sharon.
Yeah, so the other side of that is how to introduce someone into a group that has been together for a long.
Yes, you have a group that's been together for 2 or 3 rounds, and then all of a sudden somebody leaves or 2 people leave, and you need to bring a couple people in. How do you introduce them into the space? What's the agreement with that? Do the existing members get a say in who enters the space? Sometimes they would like that because they have this certain relationship, this certain rhythm. So these are pieces to think about in terms of the contract. There's the formal contract, written contract. Some people don't use written contracts. Some people use one-page contracts or agreements. And then there's the conversation with the group on how we're going to work together. So the group agreements, and then that psychological contract in terms of what do we need to feel safe enough to do the work? And how do we pay attention to that in this space? Who's responsible for naming something that's going on that doesn't feel comfortable? Is it the supervisor's responsibility only, or is it the group's? And it will depend. Some groups, as they are newly formed and not experienced in supervision, the supervisor may need to be a little bit more molding of the group and paying attention. And then the more experienced the group becomes, it almost feels like the supervisor takes a back seat and the group almost can run on their own. So what does that look like for a supervisor? And then there might be some cultural nuances around contracting and agreements. And what are they like? And especially if you have a global group and there's some in your group come from cultures where contracting agreements are very informal and some are very negotiated and written. How do you reconcile that in a group? Michelle, did you have something to add?
Are you considering having a meta coach? A coach who is observing and who has some rights to tell what he observes?
That could be a lovely model. We didn't include it in our book, but that could be a negotiated part in terms of, do we bring somebody in? That's a great question. Something to explore. Now you got me going. Thank you.
Well, we usually in France we have that within the group, not external.
Ah, so one person takes on that role
Yeah,
to pay attention to the dynamics.
exactly.
Ah, I like that. Rather
It
than
will-
everybody has a role, one person rotates to make sure that,
Exactly, because it has to be systemic. Yeah.
okay, thank you for that.
So Lily, Isabel is also written for initiating ground rules and values.
Yeah. So before you even start the work, I think it's a good idea to talk about how do we work as a group? What's important to us? What are our learning styles, as somebody said? What happens if somebody wants to leave the group? What happens if we're late coming to a group? What happens if we can't make it to a group? That's another part of the initiating way back too, in terms of configuring groups. What do you do if somebody can't make it? Does the person just not arrive? Or in some cases, in my case, my groups, they can try new renegotiate that date 1 week before and 1 week after. Because if you leave it too long, then you're bumping into another session. So that's an option for the participants.
The other thing, Lily, has to do with how the group is going to function, whether it's going to be very focused on cases or issues and how that's going to be brought, whether the supervisor is going to prompt that or bring material, what people can bring to the group, articles, poems, whatever, how that's going to work in terms of the subject matter that the group has to address.
Yeah, so there might be groups where you can bring poems and you can bring themes and and others where it's really case focused. So thinking about what's your preference in that? Michelle.
And what about delegating functions like time management or even facilitation?
Yeah, that's an option, right? So, and what is your preference as a supervisor? How comfortable do you feel with that?
Well, I usually delegate time management, I delegate meta, and sometimes facilitation. When everything is delegated, I am 100% available for, well, let's say, supervising.
Ah, nice.
The other thing is whether these guidelines are going to be written and how often they'll have to be reviewed.
And where they will be stored. Absolutely.
Right.
Where will they be written? And how often do you bring them back? And how do you negotiate updating them?
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely.
So Isabel has a question. And I'm going to invite her to bring her voice into the room. But what she said is, what do we do if we agree or disagree? So this is when you're forming the ground rules and values, etc.
That's a great question. How does the supervisor manage if there are disagreements in that space?
What I meant is, what do we do if we agree that we disagree as a group?
Yeah. What are the agreements around disagreeing as a group? Do you agree to disagree or do you work it out? Or do you like, and there could be we call them happenings, but in clinical terms, they're what we're called ruptures, right? And so what happens if there's a rupture in the space? How do you work with that? So lots of things to think about and think through, which are a little bit more, I think, complex when you have more people in a space versus you're working with one person.
I think what I sense about the word rupture sort of hung around in my mind, and I thought the main thing is to notice it and speak of it, because unless we do, it just starts to eat away at the dynamic, and then something big starts to happen. It's like it's a trigger point. So I think transparency, I like the idea of asking someone to just keep noticing what's happening and commenting on it, and get the agreement of the group to allow that, because of course that's the other thing, that they are agreeable to somebody commenting on the process.
Absolutely. Yes. What's the agreement about if something happens in the space? Who's responsible for that? We'd like everyone in the group to be responsible, or in Michelle's case, somebody's watching the dynamics to notice these things, right? And it takes courage sometimes to name what's happening in the space, because there's quite a bit of shame and vulnerability, I think, in a space that may not be on a one-on-one. One-on-one, I've got the relationship with the supervisee, supervisor, but when there's a group, I'm never knowing how it's going to, what chance am I taking in a larger group? So that's initiating agreements. There's the relational practice we talk about. And then the C in the circles framework is co-creating coherence. And this is when the group is starting to form. And we are paying a lot of attention, I think, as the supervisor and as colleagues on how are we doing here? Are we testing our norms? Are we doing what we say we're going to do? Are we sticking our foot in the water and pulling it back? And how do we live with the norms and how do we adjust to them? So it's almost like in the Tuckman model, the storming and norming, starting to norm. And then liberating wisdom. Liberating wisdom is a place where we go when we feel very comfortable in the space and we're okay with discomfort. And we can name those things that are going on. And we can go really deep. And when we feel safe enough in this group to do the work that we need to do, the deep, deep work. This is really heart-based work. This is the deeper work. This is the trust enough to be vulnerable. And this really a lot has to do with how does the supervisor hold this space? And how do the group members hold this space? How many have been in a group where you felt very comfortable in that space with your colleagues, where you can say anything you want, you know you're not going to be judged, you know it's going to go deep, and you can take the chance. That's what we call liberating wisdom. Any thoughts on that?
It's just a great stage to be at, and it brings contentment and heart racing stops and people's shoulders drop, and you feel it in the room, don't you, when that happens?
Yes, it's a beautiful
Shiny
space.
eyes.
Shiny eyes. Yes, there
Yeah.
you go. Thank you for that.
I experienced that as a version of trust, and that it takes a long time to build it, but it can be sabotaged in a nanosecond. And then the recovery is much more difficult than just getting it done the first time.
If you can recover it.
Yeah, and that's a big if, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it can be built very fast. And sometimes it takes quite a while, especially when you have a very diverse group and very global group and very different ways of thinking, different ways of processing, different values in that space. Leo.
Yeah, I think how can we put ourselves down that let others feel safe? We can create a role model by ourselves.
Yeah. How do we do that? And what's our responsibility in a group if we start talking about the group members, not just the supervisor? What's our responsibility as a group member? How do we create that space? What do we offer into that space from a vulnerable place? Yeah, thank you for that.
I have a thought, Lily. So to me, this actually really connects to that relational practice, but there's also the notion of relational maturity, which is kind of based on the stages of development, the adult stages of development. So how mature are you in your stages? And I don't mean that in like a negative way, but sometimes that's part of the development of a group is, we're not necessarily the sum of our maturity areas, but how do we develop that together?
Yeah, it's a togetherness of the group. It's almost like, and we're not a team, but if we can get to the place where we trust each other, we can go deep. And what does it take for each of us? Because we're all different. That's the biggest question I hold in a group is what is it going to take for this group to trust each other? And what's the maturity? Because you can have 5 individual, very mature people in that space, but can that make a liberating wisdom scenario? I don't know. Fiona.
In my experience, in terms of the idea of adult development, it may only take 1 or 2 people who start to introduce the adult development theme in terms of their behavior, their attitudes, their capacity to tolerate ambiguity, their willingness to stay with their vulnerability. I mean, these are all signs of a developing, mature person. And often I've been in groups recently where I saw this happen, and it was so sweet because the person who was talking in those terms was modeling being grown up, if you like. And in a sense, because she was admired and respected by the others, not in a deferential way, it somehow caught on and the conversation began to embrace some of these themes. And it was beautiful to see, actually. So the influence of somebody can be very powerful.
Yeah, that's a great point, Fiona. Who are the influencers in that group?
Mm.
Absolutely. The other piece, if I go back to on configuring groups and initiating agreements, is around, I mean, because you said deference, and it triggered me in terms of how do we create this space, or how do we encourage this space where we're peers in this space, right? Because
And
some
that,
people will walk in and go, I've got a PhD and 3 master's degrees
Mhm.
and 6 credentials. And then the newer coach, especially if you have a mixed group, one of the newer coaches feels kind of like, oh, I don't belong here.
Yes.
So how do we create a space so that people feel that they belong in this space, that they
Mm.
have equal value in this space, that they can contribute equally? Teresa, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, what I do when it happens, because in Latin America, in Peru, my country, we try to show up of what titles we have, right? So what I do, it's I start to play with photographs or cards and ask them to see what kind of emotions or sensing body sensing or whatever they feel there. So they will say, my name is Teresa, and what I feel right now through this photo is like, this is a place for trust, for example, because the photo bring here the word of trust, right? So I invite them to connect with the photos and don't present them with titles or everything, only as human beings. And it works. It works very nice.
Nice. Nice. And it's not to negate somebody's hard work of doing their PhD or their master's. That's not the point, right? The point is that has a place where you need to establish your credibility in a space. But in the supervision group, we really want to encourage equality or equity in that space as much as we can.
And Lily, there's another comment from Sunny on a slightly different tack, but co-creating coherence is very much like the group developing its own personhood and identity.
That's a nice way of putting it. Thank you, Sunny. Seeing
Mm.
you wrote that chapter. That is the key point. Thank you, Sunny. Okay. Yes, it's really creating your own identity as a group. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Testing things out, figuring out who you are in the space as a group and as an individual in that space. Yes, thank you. All right. So
And
let's,
that also help lower the risk of power dynamics, because it's always present. But when people with you talk about it from the beginning, then it's going to, help not to, not to come up too heavily. Yeah.
thank you, Jean-Olivier. Yes, there are definitely power dynamics in every single group. So how do you work with that? How do you acknowledge it? How do you find a way to, you can't get rid of it, but how do you balance it more?
I
Absolutely.
love what Teresa said about the cards, because this is something that I work with Michelle when I was trained, that when we meet, we meet through cards and emotions. So what we bear in mind that, oh, I was feeling this kind of emotion and this person as well. We recognize ourselves through the emotion that we were feeling instead of uh, credentials or any level of training. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, that is something that everyone can relate to, and it doesn't have a rank with it necessarily. Welcome, Denise. Do you want to say hello?
Howdy. Denise Lessert, grateful to be calling in from the unsurrendered, the stolen lands, the traditional territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, our Coast Salish speaking people. Happy
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Welcome. All right. So the final E is ending intentionally. Is Lynn still here? She had to leave. Okay. So ending intentionally, what does that bring up for you when you think about ending intentionally?
I'll just quickly say that it really is closure. The ending is also a beginning. That's one thing that the circles model, I think, really emphasizes, and just in its structure thematically, it takes you around again to start all over again.
Nice. Thank you. Yes, endings aren't the end of things. It's also beginnings. Endings are beginnings as well. Elena.
I think it is a moment of anchoring insights. It's also an opportunity for the rest of the group to know you because you see the filtering that everybody, out of everything that was shared, everyone has a lens. And then with each of these endings and reflection, we get to know each other and see what we are resonating with.
Nice. So there's a way of getting to know you at an even deeper level. Yes. And what about endings that happen at any given time throughout the course of the number of sessions that you're doing? How do you deal with that? Linda, you had your hand up first, and then Leo.
I was just going to say that for me, an ending of a group in terms of the series or the engagement is a little bit like putting a bracket around that chapter, if you will, in the group's existence, and just noting that this is what we discovered together during this period of time. And so won't that be interesting to see if we continue what might be in the next?
Nice. Thank you. Leo, and then Michelle, and then Alina.
Yeah, I think every relationship will have an official ending. It's an official way to say the end of this kind of relationship that is good for all psychology for each member in this team or in this group.
Yeah, so there is an official pause or brackets to what's going on in this group. Yeah, thank you. Michelle, and then Alina.
Well, one of the functions of supervision is development, and usually it's contracted at the beginning of the cycle. So I think that one of the things to do when we end is to check that the development objectives have been reached.
So there's an opportunity to recap what the learning was. Yes. And did we?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But according to the objectives set at the beginning.
Okay, so if you set objectives at the beginning, this is an opportunity to come back to say, did we meet them? And I would imagine too, Michelle, that you'd be doing it midway point too to say, are we getting there, versus waiting till the last session, because it might be too late if we don't make it right.
Well,
So we're
of course,
monitoring
yes.
that along the way.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but at the end, more
also, I
officially.
mean, there are other functions of supervision which should be met.
Great. Thank you for that. Alina, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I mean, of course, building on what Michelle was saying, it is obviously the evaluation, right? We know we have the standard nowadays. It's not a competency, but that is with us, and it's throughout the session, at the end of a session. It is throughout, as you said, midway at the end. But I think what I wanted to contribute, or what this conversation brought in mind, was how do we contract because we talked about bringing somebody new, but how do we contract the fact that if you decide to leave, will you give the space that you complete this journey? Because I mean, for yourself, like your closure and the group closure, so it doesn't finish abruptly. And I think that connects also for me with a company from coaching, but also in supervision. No matter if we decide that it's an end, let's have another meeting, to evaluate and actually we don't just close.
Yeah, it could be that you had an additional meeting just for ending. Yeah, absolutely. And there's endings of individual sessions as well. How do you capture the learning at the end of each session if you do? Something to think about. And then the final circles framework letter is the S for systemic influences. And what are all those influences that are in the space with us systemically? Fiona, did you wanted to add
Well,
something?
sorry, but I just remembered I had a very upsetting experience. I was in a peer group, and there were about 10 of us, and we met monthly. And one of the people in it said, "I'm really sorry, but I can't manage the traveling. I have a lot of traveling to do, and I've just decided not to stay with you all." And my God, she was ill with cancer and died about a month later. And we were all so shocked because she hadn't been able to share with us beyond that she was tired. And that made me think about, what do we say? You know, if either we are unwell ourselves or members of the group, are they free to say, "I'm really struggling here, I need to tell you X and Y"? Or might we as group supervisor say, "Sorry folks, but I'm not sure I can continue because whatever," you know? So that made me think a lot about personal issues and how we deal with them ourselves, and how do group members deal with them. So it's quite tricky.
Wow. Yes. Thank you, Fiona. Life happens, right? And there's a lot of
Exactly.
stuff there's a lot of stuff happening in the world right now too that's impacting us. This is a great example of systemic thinking is how can you think about what's going on in the world and how it's impacting us individually, our supervisees, our
Mm.
profession, the wider system, right? There's all these layers in here. But that is something like what happens when one of your group members leaves suddenly for whatever reason,
Yeah, yeah.
I
death
really
being
thank
one of them.
I thank Fiona for bringing that up because I had a group, and in the beginning, after the first couple of sessions, one of the members said or revealed and shared that she had a disability. And
Oh,
that disability was preventing her from fully participating in the full 2 hours of the group. And the group came together in such a way, it was really miraculous, in support of her, and shared their own limitations. And
yes.
she ended up not leaving the group ultimately
Oh,
because of that. So it was really, it is so important. Thanks, Fiona, for pointing that out.
And what is it that the person needs that so they can feel safe enough to say that to the group? Because it sounds like in Fiona's case, they didn't feel like they could say it. So what did they need versus the one your example, Sonny, where they did feel safe enough to say that and share it.
I mean, I think what happened with this person was that she was actually, as a person, very sweet and kind and gentle, and didn't want to upset us. That's what her husband said to me some weeks later at the funeral. And I thought, yeah, so there's a personality differences, aren't there? And then the group safety is another issue. So it's a combination, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's not easy. Not easy.
I read one somewhere that said as soon as you add people into the mix, it becomes complex.
Exactly.
So,
Okay.
so
So
Lily, just before you move on to systems, Kim has asked, I'd love to hear some creative ideas for reflection people use in group supervision, i.e. drawing on what they hear, what the group role play, sorry, have group role play the dynamic the coach is bringing in so they see it played out, etc. So I don't know if there's time for that or maybe come
thank you for
back to
that,
it.
Kim. I would suggest we do a whole session on that.
Mm.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
Who would like to run that one? Oh, Fiona, I saw your hand glove. I'd love people to bring in their
Perhaps,
creative ideas of how they
perhaps
work with groups.
I'd do something with Jocelyn. Who knows? Anyway.
Okay, we'll do something in the new year around creativity. That would be great. Okay, Michelle, go ahead.
I have a question. Systemic influence, do you mean that you put that late in the process? Because in fact, I put that at the very beginning.
Well, yeah, so if you saw, sorry, let me go. When you see here, systemic influences and relational practice are the two keys to everything. They overlay everything. But when we talk about the circle model, it was the S. That's where we had it fit in. But when we talk about the framework, we say systemic influences and relational practices permeate everything.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very key, especially in the supervision space. We want to be able to see the bigger pictures and all the things that are going on.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I thought we would do breakout groups, but it doesn't look like we have time. I mismanaged time. See? What kind of group supervisor am I anyways? All right. Well, let's open up the floor. What do you think about it? Especially those that haven't shared anything. You know, what's coming up for you? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Let's just open up the floor. Thoughts?
Well, there is a comment in Sunny is saying, what about the supervisor style? It is directive and how that influences the group, question mark.
Do you want to say something more about that, Sunny? No? Are you frozen?
Please. I was just saying whether it's directive or not directive, how you were very laissez-faire, how you actually put yourself and your style into the group as the supervisor also is very influential, or can be.
Yeah. And when do you, as a supervisor, know when to be more directive versus step back and let the group take over? Like there's this dance that we play as well, right? Yeah. Good point. Thank you. Other thoughts? Sharon.
Yeah, so this is great. I've really enjoyed hearing so many things that have been popping up for me because I don't communicate with a lot of supervisors locally. I'm on the GSN, but this particular conversation is very directed. And so I'm really enjoying it. One of the things that I have, I guess, not really articulated is that I have, and when I say articulated, I mean to who? I'm not too sure, maybe just to myself. I have I have two groups of about six that I have running, but I have two groups that have been together as a group of people for 8 years. And, this, the wisdom of the one group, particularly, certainly that liberating wisdom has given me language for what happens because there are hardly ever any absenteeism. We meet once a month. It's in the calendar a year in advance, and everyone shows up. A couple of them have moved onto Zoom now because they've relocated because we all started out living in Johannesburg and people's practices have matured. COVID changed so much. We've got a couple of, now 3 of 5 are digital nomads. But it doesn't matter where they are, they show up on Zoom or wherever. And it is such a bonded group. And at the same time, there is no hesitation on calling each other if there's something that is not sitting right or something that's just not working. So I do think we are extremely fortunate with this particular group. The other one has had a sort of a couple of parties coming and going, but a few of the members have been around for a long time. So listening to this, because I've often wondered, it's like, when they say you're coaching someone, you've been coaching them for a good few years, are you actually coaching them? And so it's good to be able to articulate this and actually know that this group does the most incredible work together. Their practices have matured to such an extent that it's quite remarkable. So I just wanted to share that.
That's beautiful. To have that space to go to be challenged and not feel judged, that's where we want to get to, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Sorry, somebody was trying to say something. No? Other thoughts, comments, questions?
I want to share a situation I had. So I'm coaching an executive team of 5 people, and the agreement in writing as well as verbally has been to, you know, move the conversation forward and have breakthroughs and insights and, reflective thinking and so forth. And the first meeting that I had with them was exactly that. It was like a big bang. It was like, the excitement in the room and all that. And the second meeting, which happened 2 months later, it was a friend of mine puts it this way, and I apologize for using profanity, but it was like the BMW kind of situation where it's bitching, moaning, and whining. And and it was just very, very hard to get him out of that space. And I really felt that the conversation was not moving forward. So obviously, I was in a listening mode and all that, but it was just very, very challenging. And I felt it was almost contrary to the agreement we had made. The interesting thing is that at the end of the meeting, uh, we just kind of did a summary kind of thing and reflections. And they said, this was very, very helpful because, we don't have a space where the 5 of us almost in unison can, and they actually used the word, bitch about what's going on and complain and get our frustrations out. And this is a nonprofit, and they're basically losing their funding and so forth. So it was really interesting. I'm still kind of, like I said, trying to reconcile what my expectations and my judgment, was with, what was their actual experience. But just wanted to share that sometimes the train is going to go in a different direction, and we might want to still kind of like getting back to the station. So anyways, just group dynamics, team dynamics.
Thanks for sharing that, Roland. Those can happen in supervision as well in groups. Even with mature coaches, we can go what we call off the rails. But if we look deeper, we can think about, well, what is in our space around all of that, right? Let's pause and just look at this process that's happened and what is in our space. It's great. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm watching time. I'm seeing any last thoughts before we start closing.
I just would love to say it's always such a gift to come together. And but what really spoke right to my heart center, Lily, was when you said this is heart-based work. And the gift and the reminder of that. And I love everything you shared, but that's what really is resonating right now. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. Fiona?
I absolutely agree with that. So thank you. That was a wonderful word to bring in at the beginning. And I think the complexity of these situations that you so beautifully articulate today, but also the diagram. I mean, we need something like to hold, as it were, give shape. It's like scaffolding in a way. I don't know if that's the right metaphor, but there's somewhere in the middle of that is a heart. And it's that heart that actually holds it together and allows people to move around, because that's the thing, it's dynamic, your diagram. I love it.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah. 18 months of blood, sweat, and tears.
Yes,
and joy.
Sure.
All right. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up on what's coming, July 21st, Judy Wolf will be talking about the role of discomfort in coaching supervision. August 18th, Echoes of the Past. The supervisor's role when the present situation awakens what was once over. And that is Leanne Loish. And then I think it's Reggie Jackson is coming in September to be announced. Our lineup is complete for this year. It's in the newsletter, and I will add the creative practices, Kim. I'll put that for next year. I look for somebody to facilitate that unless somebody here puts their hand up now. You don't have to know how the creative practice, just facilitate the conversation. No? Okay.
I'll do it, Lily.
Yay, thank you, Sunny. I'll negotiate with you what date, which month, okay? Excellent. Okay, and then as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at internal coaching supervision. I like that. Okay. Are you going to facilitate that, Sharon? Will you facilitate? Yes, okay, good. Great. Somebody else had their hand up? Alina?
Yeah, I can as well because I've been an internal coach, so I would love to support.
Do you do internal supervision?
No, not so much, but it's something I work towards.
Okay, because this is supervision. So you can
Yeah,
come to the
I know.
meeting and participate. Sharon will lead that. How's that?
Yeah.
Great. And Sunny's going to do creative. All right. Last thoughts before we close. Learnings, comments. Thank you for joining us and thank you for engaging in the conversation. It's really nice to have that interaction so much. Thank you all, and we'll see you July 21st.